Welcome to the underground. If you're new here, welcome to EarthtoneS. I am your hostess, Kakala Moon, and we are doing a staycay in the underground to learn a little something about the history of astrology. And this is the first installment in the little mini series that we're embarking on to learn about ancient Kemet and other African contributions to the history of astrology. Thank you to all my ones and twos, one of whom is celebrating a birthday weekend. So shout out to my dear friend and sister Renee, who is a Scorpio to the heart. And I appreciate all the support that she's given me in my journey. So let's learn a little history about astrology, shall we? All right, so most people in the astrology community attribute the history of astrology to the Babylonians. Uh, the earliest account, that is, to Mesopotamia, when in fact these were migrating Cushites, migrating Axumites, migrating Meroites, and other Africans that were gathering in this educational hub called the Nile Valley civilization. The first astrological evidence is in Naphtha. Brother Anthony Browder, as well as John Anthony West, in his book Serpent in the Sky, will account for the astrological findings in Naphtha. These were timekeepers. So Naphtha is an ancient calendar site, and there were many, many calendar sites throughout Southern Africa and other places around the continent. So let's move on because the writing is still on the walls. Now, although I agree with this, I did not write this, but I am going to add to the Egyptian zodiac, also known as the decans, originated from ancient Egypt and is believed to have its roots in the early dynastic period around 3000 BCE. Now, this was around the time of the unification of Upper and Lower Kemet. Because of these migrations, the people had fallen out of Ma'at, and therefore Norma, the king of he wore both crowns at that particular time, but he was in agreement with Zoser, who was the king of Lower Egypt, if I don't have those transposed. But centrality and harmony was the objective, as well as spirituality in African life. And so before this unification, their spiritual practices were practiced throughout the land from uh, the god Unkulunkulu in the Zulu nation to Olodumare in the Yoruba nation. The Akan people were also migrating because the Sahara was drying up. But the most early accounts of astrology was found to be around 4260 BC. You had the Dravidians who left Africa around 150 to 100,000 years ago, established the Indus Valley. I thought around maybe, well, around that time, around 3000 BC, they were flourishing around 2600 BCE and began traveling through the Indian Ocean and along the peninsula during this time of migration and trade. They bought their indigo and their spices, but the lineage of animals and cattle, mud brick architecture, and the rites of passage and homage to the dead are all African traditions. But to continue on, the Egyptian zodiac later influenced the development of the more well-known Western zodiac, showcasing the enduring impact of ancient Egyptian astrology on modern astrological traditions. And so we can go all the way back to Adam's calendar, which is actually said to be by Michael Tellinger, uh, and I believe he may be a geologist, but uh, just off the top of my head, he dates Adam's calendar back to 75,000 years ago. However, that's questionable because what he said off camera during the taping of Magical Egypt with John Anthony West, he would even risk taking it back 160,000 years, which is the other cycle of the, well, twice as long as the 75,000 year estimation that was given. Now, the Ghanaian plate that you see here is very familiar to many who may even mistake it for Mesoamerica. And that is because there were many similarities. There was trade, and there were migrations at this time. And that plate is very similar to the Dresden Codex, where it is known that the Dresden Codex shows cycles of the sun, moon, as well as Venus. But the central figure here is Bes, and this is a West African um, uh, figure that is shown in monoliths all throughout West Africa, as well as in ancient Kemet. Then you have the Ethiopians. They recognize talismans. And of course, they also use zoological manifestations of themselves through these animals. They shared space with, well, their land was adjacent to the land of Punt, where there were the giraffes and the lion and rhinoceros and all types of animals. And ultimately, this education, this knowledge, and intellectual wisdom centralized in Kemet. And we're going to go further into that. The Alkebulian or Alkebulian calendar shows the circular wheel. And this is nothing new to ancient Kemet in that it is the timepiece of the calendar. And so the zodiacal wheel and its segments are significant to the 12 segments of the fruit of the tree of life. And in that calendrical wheel are the rays of the sun. So that's where we see the 60 degrees, the square 90 degrees, and as well as the trine, the 120 degree, and of course the opposition at 180 degrees. But these are the 7 rays of the sun, and where the sun hit those angles were also very well known to the ancient Kemetans, because one thing that was clear, and that was as the Greeks learned from the ancient Kemetans as they acknowledged themselves, the 3 components of meta, metaphysics is philosophy, spirituality, and science. And although they picked up the intellect and picked up the science, they decided to discard the spirituality because they did not understand the spirituality. But ancient Africans have always connected themselves to the rhythm of the planet, to nature. And so their spirituality was an expression of that. And they were the first architects of the archetype. And so you see that here in all of the pictures that are displayed. And we'll start with the upper left-hand corner where you have this centaur with wings and the bow and arrow that is significant to the land of Tarseti, which is the land of the bow. And then you have Nut, goddess Nut. Goddess Nut is the counterpart to Geb, the separation of heaven and earth. And that is the message of Ma'at, is to create balance between heaven and earth. And we'll get into more of that as we move along. But you have Khonsu. He is the round-headed netter that fashioned man on the potter's wheel. So we have many illustrations of that story in other traditions and cultures as well. You have Nefertiti in the lower left-hand corner charging her crystals under the sun. And this is during the time when her husband, Akhenaten, changed the concept of recognizing the unseen presence of God to the presence of God in honoring the sun disk, the noonday sun, the bright noon sun. And next to that, you have Hathor in her glory, showing the crown of upper and or lower Kemet, the double crown there. And you see Aset in her falcon form, which was the form that she was in when she hovered over her brother husband for the Immaculate Conception of Hebrew. In the lower right-hand corner, you have this sister here doing a ritual to the moon. And how I know it's the moon is because of the netter of the Medu Neter beside the serpent here, that is the mountains of the moon where the god Hapi dwells, where you see the hieroglyphs of the two mountains of the moon and the god Hapi. So the temple of Dendera is another example of how far back these concepts go. And from the different lands to the central hub of the Nile Valley, the Temple of Dendera is to honor Hathor. But what you see here is a procession in the center that is indicative of the golden spiral, the golden mean. And in the center of it, I believe, is the thigh of the bull, which coincides with the ceremony that is performed during funerals called the opening of the mouth, to give the deceased a last opportunity to send a message. Beside the darker Temple of Dendera illustration, you have the one to the left here where you have Heru and Khonsu at the cardinal points. So they are representative of the sun and the moon, the reflection and awareness of the self, as well as duality. The separation of heaven and earth is displayed here. The separation of matter and spirit, or spirit from matter. The essence and the ego is what it's all about. And as it's shown as the joining of heaven and earth, you have the goddess Aset there as the representation of the Great Mother, the first physical manifestation on the earth. And so there are many spiritual messages in the Temple of Dendera. And many of us are familiar with the prayer, the perfect prayer, which are actually the 7 petitions. And so many of us were taught that we are externalizing this petition to an entity outside of ourselves, when in fact it is to ourselves. And when we say our Father, which art in heaven, we're talking about the cosmic force of the divine spark, which art in heaven. Thy kingdom come is speaking to the higher consciousness, uh, the higher dimensions of self. Thy will be done, meaning my will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so that was very heavy and the main concept throughout the land. The picture of the earth and its ley lines show that the ancients circumvented the globe when they decided on the locations of the megaliths that were built throughout the world. And you can see where ancient Kemet is, and also some energetic hot spots or heavy spots in the Atlantic, as well as the Atlantic Ridge. So we're going to get further into that later. But if you saw the recent auroras that took place day before yesterday, they reached all the way down to Maine, whereas they're usually concentrated at the North Pole. We had this geomagnetic storm that was around a level 3 to 5, which are the highest levels of geomagnetic activity towards the Earth. So we had an X-class solar flare that hit the planet. And these energies are impacting not only the ley lines of the planet, but they're also enacting or interacting with our consciousness and affecting us on a conscious level. But this message here is from Thoth, and his protege was Imhotep. It was said that Imhotep was a physical manifestation of Thoth. And so I find it ironic that they use Asclepius here, who learned this information from the writings of Imhotep, the mathematician, the architect, the physician, whose display of how an operating space where surgery is performed is still on the walls. In other words, the layout of the instruments in the operating room in preparation for surgery is still on the walls left by Imhotep, who was Zozer's right-hand man, the architect of the step pyramid, the first pyramid upon the unification of ancient Kemet. But to read what it says here, you probably already have way ahead of me. He said, art there not aware, O Asclepius, that Egypt is the image of heaven, or rather that it is the projection below of the order of things above? If the truth must be told, this land is indeed the temple of the world. And as you can see here, indeed, the Nile Valley is something that you can superimpose this Orion Nebula over top of and have it fit perfectly. But I can add a third element to that and superimpose the central nervous system and the heart of the human, and it will fit perfectly. So that's it for today, family. By all means, click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And as I get out of here and figure out how to get out of here, we'll see you in the next video.